Hey juniors, I hope that this recording works. I'm trying to upload my APUSH video to YouTube and it's just taking forever. I think everybody in the world is using the internet right now, which is probably true. Okay, it is, let's see here, it is Wednesday, April 15th. I think that's right. Let me look at my calendar. I'm getting my days confused because I record one day and anyway. Coming at you here from Rogers, Arkansas once again, and I think I mentioned to you in my last video that we were going to finish the rest of the school year by highlighting important presidents and important events in American history. And we're going to get as close to Donald Trump as we possibly can. In fact, I will get to Donald Trump one way or the other. We may have to skip a few important people to get there. So I have brought my friend, Captain America. He is going to participate in today's class. I don't know if you can see this or not, but I happen to have another very important person pinned to my shirt right there. Can you guys see that? You can probably tell who that is, but that would be the former President Obama. And I have him pinned to my shirt today. Chapman drew that for me a couple of, probably 4 years ago. The reason that I have him joining our class today is because finally, after months and months of speculation, President Obama did decide to oh gosh, what's the word? Endorse, there's the word. To endorse his former vice president, Joe Biden, for president. He has been holding out for months and months during the primary season, and everybody suspected he was not happy with Joe Biden, but I think he's going to get what he gets and not throw a fit, and he's going to toe the party line. And apparently today, I think online, he released an endorsement statement that saying that he was formally endorsing the former Vice President Joe Biden. So that is why President Obama is with us today. I'm not wearing much makeup, but I do have some lipstick on because if I don't wear lipstick, I'm invisible. So it's hard for me to put makeup on when I'm sitting here closeted into my house and not seeing anybody. But for you guys, I did. For you guys in Captain America. So there we go. By the way, I saw the second Thor movie. Wasn't too bad. I'm not a big Thor person. He's kind of a girly man, but I did enjoy at the very end of the Thor, well, towards the end of the Thor movie, Loki, the evil brother, decided to show up as Captain America very briefly, so that made my day. So I will continue the saga of the Avengers series as we go. So I am going to formally announce my next event as we're marching through American history that we are going to discuss today. And I will do that in just a minute. First, you guys should have already taken your quiz. That should have been the very first thing that you did when you opened up your Google Classroom today for me. Hopefully it wasn't too difficult. I wasn't trying to trick you or anything, but we are limited on how we can do these quizzes and tests, and I felt like that was a good quiz. So hopefully you did well. So I'm going to go ahead and make my announcement. We are going to dive into World War I. And I know that you guys are familiar with World War I. I went to the World War I Museum with you guys last year. I'm trying to think who, Miss Hammonds was your world history teacher. And so World War I, of course, is a world event. It didn't just address America. Your textbook talks about the world impact and then focuses specifically on the United States. As you probably already know, the United States did not become involved in the war till really the last few months of the war. By the time we got involved in the war, everybody was pretty much stinking worn out from fighting in those trenches in long, drawn-out, horrible conditions. And so by the time the Americans got there, we were ready to go, revved up to go, and marched across Europe pretty quickly and made the decision we would not be building trenches. That was not our plan, and that was a good plan. So we were only in it for a few short months. Towards the end of the war, probably an American soldier, they believe, began a infection that spread throughout the entire world known as the Spanish flu. and millions and millions and millions of people died, and in large part because there was a world conflict going on, and people were moving from various places, from continent to continent, who normally would not. And so it's similar to what's happening right now in that it was a pandemic and it affected a lot, the whole world. But because of the times and the medical facilities and advancements at the time, and the fact that the virus was just horrible, it was a coronavirus on steroids. It was a horrible situation, coupled at the very end of a tragic war. So I'm going to go through World War I as fast as I can. I have a whole treasure trove of videos I would love to show you. Of course, I can't. There's one called All Quiet on the Western Front that I have showed in the past. It's probably a little over 2 hours long, but it's told from the perspective of Germany. And I am there's a short video clip that I do want you to watch. But and there's a number of video clips in this particular PowerPoint that I'm going to have you watch. So the very first slide that you will see is a timeline of events that take you from the Civil War to the Progressive Era, which we just covered with Teddy Roosevelt, leading up to World War I. I'm just going to zip through it. It has all of the various presidents: Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, Mr. President Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, Cleveland again, and then of course President McKinley, Teddy Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. And if you recall, Teddy Roosevelt, William Howard Taft, and Woodrow Wilson are our progressive presidents. They ruled, or they served during a time of progress, or that's what it was referred to as. And that progressive era, at the top of the timeline, it says Civil War, Reconstruction, New Industrial Age, Immigration and Urbanization, American Imperialism, which we skipped, which was the Spanish-American War, the rise of mass culture, which we did talk about, and then the Progressive Era during Teddy Roosevelt. And that takes us into World War I. The world was certainly changing during this time. President Woodrow Wilson, number 28, he was a Democrat, first Democrat president in a very long time, since Grover Cleveland. He was an unusual man. I should say, he's not that he's unusual. He came to the presidency in an unusual fashion. If you recall, Teddy Roosevelt was disgruntled with his predecessor, Mr. Taft, and decided to run as a third-party candidate. And so the Republican Party was split, and Woodrow Wilson won the election as a result of that. He had a little bit of history or background in politics, but primarily he was an academic. He had been president of Princeton University. His father was a Presbyterian minister. So he had that sort of a background rather than a political background, but he did serve as, I believe, the governor of New Jersey prior to becoming president of the United States. So he was a really smart guy, had a way with words, was persuasive, a nice man, a little bit cold and aloof, but formal and proper and nice. And I think that he probably would have never become president if Teddy Roosevelt hadn't gone third ticket. But nonetheless, that's who we ended up with. So Woodrow Wilson becomes president, and he is president at the end of the Progressive Era. And while he is president is when the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th Amendments are passed. One of those very important amendments, the 19th Amendment, which gave, let me jump back in here real quick, 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th, there it goes, the women's right to vote. Now I'm going to have you guys watch a movie called Iron Jaw Angels, which is, I think it was a film done by HBO, which documents, or it tells the story of the women's suffrage movement and some of the big players during President Woodrow Wilson's era who were arrested because of their constant harassing the president in the White House to act on this in the middle of the war. And prior to the war, these activist women were arrested, they were imprisoned, they were force-fed because they went on hunger strikes. It's a really interesting telling of their story. It does have a little bit of a feminist flavor, but not too bad. It tells the truth of what happened. and the circumstances of what happened. And I enjoyed watching it. It was very educational. So there's a lot of big name actresses in this movie and in that movie as well. And we're going to watch that after we finish World War One. So YouTube has it uploaded for I think for anybody. I don't think it's one that I purchased. I better double check that. So okay, so anyway, so after you see the picture of Woodrow Wilson on the PowerPoint slide, you're going to see a couple of images of those suffragettes parked outside of the White House with their signs protesting, and there's some references to America's war effort and that sort of thing. And so I wanted you to be aware of why that picture was on there, because I wanted you to draw that connection when we watch the movie in a couple of class periods from now. One of the things that, as I would say, I call myself an amateur historian. I'm certainly not a professional historian, but I have a sense of the bigger picture a lot of times because I've taught history for so long. And so I can see how an event in the future is connected to an event in the past. And most certainly, World War One, as it was referred to, the war to end all wars, was not the war that ended all wars. It was called the Great War at the time because there had not been another world war. Unfortunately, the way that World War One was resolved, it wasn't resolved. It put a lot of punishment and blame on certain nations and certain people groups, and as a result, their anger and resentment boiled to the surface in the nature of political upheaval, socialism, Nazism, fascism, and the world was on fire after World War One, the world of Europe, and it led directly to another war, which affectionately becomes known as World War II. And there is a chart there, or a picture and a sort of a timeline that connects World War I with World War II. On one side of the slide, it has a picture of Woodrow Wilson. On the other side, it has a picture of Franklin Roosevelt, and it has World War I and World War II connected. In between the wars, of course, there was the Great Depression. And actually, it wasn't just a Great Depression in the United States. It was a depression around the world. And so coupled with political upheaval and a just a really stinky way that World War I ended, all of those things culminated and came together in just a yucky mess, which led directly to World War II and an opening for crazy Adolf Hitler to come to the scene. There was other problems in the world, but Adolf Hitler just popped into my mind. Adolf Hitler was a soldier in World War I. He served on the front lines. He served in the trenches. He was nearly killed one time. He found himself out in no man's land, which is the area between trenches, and a British soldier had him in his sights and chose not to kill him for some reason. Chose not to shoot him. I think he was unarmed, and the man felt sympathetic for him. Adolf Hitler was also impacted by the nerve gas, the mustard gas that was used in World War I, was temporarily blinded. And it is said that that is the reason he chose not to use chemical weapons on the battlefield during World War II. Now, he's most certainly used chemicals, in his death machines in the concentration camps. I don't want to overlook that, a sick, systematic way of killing people. But he did not choose to use it on the battlefield, I assume, because as a combatant, he was affected or impacted by it. So, anyway, so as we move into World War I, the Great War, the war lasted from 1914 to 1918. There were a number of behind-the-scenes reasons that the war took place. As the world turned from 1899 to 1901 to 1910 in the industrial era, and new weapons of war and empire building and all of those things that were taking place during that era, there was a significant amount of friction amongst the working classes of various empires. Communication was easier. Electricity, the printing press, just the world was modernizing, and so it was easier for people to mobilize. And as these empires and these imperial tendencies of these empires around the globe were increasing, the common people were increasingly unhappy and unsatisfied and pushed back against that ruling class. And you just had a lot of chaos in places around the world. And so I thought that the film in the World War I Museum did a really, the intro film did a really, really good job of explaining the environment by which World War II erupted. Um, your book cites 4 different reasons for the causes of World War I. Some of these you are familiar with: nationalism, which is a devotion to the interests and culture of one's nation. So you saw a lot of nationalist tendencies in these various empires. Imperialism, which is empire building. Even the United States engaged in that during the Spanish-American War. We gobbled up a bunch of territories like Guam and the Philippines and Puerto Rico. We also took some other islands in the Pacific, like the Samoan Islands. We grabbed Hawaii. We purchased Alaska from Russia. So it wasn't just the rest of the world that was doing empire building. The United States was doing it as well. Militarism, the development of armed forces, and their use as a tool of diplomacy for empire building. So people were building up their navies and their armies in order to empire build, but then those were used at the disposal during the war. And then, of course, the alliance system. In order to protect interests, different countries were aligning themselves with others and promising, hey, I got your back, you got my back, and back and forth. And then when the war erupted, all of those alliances, a lot of them secret alliances, pulled everybody into this cauldron of war. The next slide is the specific straw that broke the camel's back, and it's a picture of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. There's actually video footage of them getting into their car. They were in an open convertible old car when Ferdinand and his wife Sophie were both shot. He was the heir to the Austrian-Hungary throne, and he was visiting Serbia, which is one of their territories. There was a group of terrorists known as, I think, the Black Hand. I forgot to refresh my memory. I believe they were called the Black Hand. I think so. Serbian Gavrilo Princip was his name. And as the story goes, a group of men met there knowing that Archduke Ferdinand and his wife were taking a tour of the area in Serbia, kind of in a parade, waving to people. And they lost courage to go through the assassination. Somebody had detonated some sort of explosive device earlier in the day, and the Archduke had gone to the hospital to visit those who were injured and got back into his car and continued his tour of the city of Sarajevo. And the terrorists had dispersed, and Princip was actually sitting in a coffee shop off the beaten path of the parade, and the Ferdinand's driver got lost. And Princip looked up, and there was the Archduke. And so he got his courage up and walked out, and he shot both Sophie and the Archduke at point blank range. And so they both died fairly quickly. Sophie died before the Archduke did, and apparently he was crying out, don't leave me, and just a whole bunch of horrible stuff. There's actually video of the crowd jumping onto Princip and dragging him away as he's being arrested. I have access to that video, but I don't know how to access it to you guys. So unfortunately, I can't show it to you. And so that was in June of 1914 over on the other side of the world. And that one event was, like I said, that it was like lighting the dynamite. There were lots of other underlying issues, but this was the event that blows everything up. And so this was kind of the series of events. So that happened in June of 1914. Austria-Hungary essentially insisted that Serbia take responsibility for this, even though they didn't have anything to do with it. But because people from there had done this, Austria-Hungary insisted that they pay reparations and say they were sorry and admit guilt, and they would not. So and within a month, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia. That was July 28th. And when Russia, who is the protector of the Slavic people, found out or knew that Austria-Hungary was going to declare war on Serbia, they began to fortify their border. Russia did. And Germany saw that as a threat. And so Germany preemptively declares war on Russia. So Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. A couple days later, Germany declares war on Russia. And then because France is starting to mobilize to protect Russia's interests and just to protect itself, Germany then turns and declares war on France and begins to invade Belgium. And Germany obviously has a secret alliance with Austria-Hungary. The assassination of the Archduke has nothing to do with Germany. It has everything to do with the problems in the Austria-Hungary Empire, but Germany takes advantage of this situation. And so Germany invades Belgium quickly. That happens on August 3rd. Britain they're up there on the island going, what is happening? And so the British on that same day, on August 3rd, declare war on Germany and Austria-Hungary as well. And so in an attempt to buffer their borders and protect the French. And then in September of 1914, Germany makes its way into France, and that is where those trenches, those lines are drawn, and everybody digs in, and it gets bloody, and it's a stalemate, and nobody picks up pretty much any land for the next 4 years, three and a half years or so. Now you have to keep in mind that this is the era that it's really pre-airplane. Airplanes had been developed, but not used in warfare, and they were not very advanced. And so people today, they would be sitting ducks, sitting in trenches. Airplanes would come over. Actually, remote bombs would be sent over with drones. But at the time, you did not have that. In fact, an airplane was so rudimentary at that time that if it did try to make its way across trenches, that it would probably get blown out of the sky. So there you have it. That is a series of events. You notice that I didn't say anything about the United States. The United States is like, we don't want to get involved in this. They kind of pull in like isolationists. That is Europe's war. I can hear George Washington and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson saying, stay out of it, don't get involved. And we didn't. We thought, you know what, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to play sides. We're not going to choose sides. We're going to continue to try to trade with everybody, help everybody out, but we're not going to pick. Keep in mind, however, that we definitely had a more of affinity towards those of Anglo-Saxon, European, Western European background, because most of Americans were from that area of Europe. Less sympathy with the Austrian-Hungary Empire. There was a conflict with Germany because there were lots and lots, millions of German Americans. And initially, there was, I would say, a split in the country. My dog is... You okay, buddy? He's over there trying to cough something up, I think. So anyway, Americans were split about how they felt about Germany because there were so many of us that had German ancestry. Okay, so the way that the alliances line up, or the central powers, are Germany, Austria, Hungary, and then the Ottoman Empire, the Islamic Empire. That's another reason that Americans ended up siding with the English and whatnot, because of that strange relationship that the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians had with the Ottoman Empire. And then the allies are France, Britain, and Russia. Eventually, the United States is going to join in about the time that Russia drops out. So almost this very similar alignment as World War II. You'll see a map on the PowerPoint that shows you the military alliances and how this all kind of played out. It's a really good map. So take a second to look at that and see what side everybody is on. I also want you to pay attention to who is neutral. The countries that are neutral. Spain and Portugal stay neutral, which they did in World War II as well. The Scandinavian countries, but you'll notice Russia, France, North Africa, etc. They're all in. And then so there's a few pictures here that I pulled offline that are pictures of the trench warfare. They're really good pictures. I'm amazed at how clear that they are. I want you to take a look at those. And when you get down to the fourth or fifth picture, you'll see a line of gentlemen that are, they've got their hands on each other's shoulders, and they're blindfolded, and they have come in contact with some mustard gas. and they are going on their way to the medical facilities. There's a film strip there, and there's actually two video clips that I want you to watch. The first one, it says, is just German war footage. Spectacular reels of raw German footage that shows you their attitude as the war starts, and then just the horror of trench warfare. One thing in particular that I want you to watch for are the flamethrowers that would go across no man's land and blow those torches into caverns and caves and potholes where bombs had exploded trying to get people out. I don't know that I've ever seen that before. I saw that on this reel. I think it shows up twice in the film. They put music with it. There was probably no music with it at the time. I mean, I know there was no music with it, but some of it was probably silent film. And then there's a little box that has a picture of a movie that says All Quiet on the Western Front. And there's about a 3.5-minute clip from that movie that I pulled off of YouTube that shows the German soldiers taking cover when the French send in mustard gas into their side of the no man's land. And there's a little bit of narration about what that was like. So I want you to watch those two video clips when you get to that slide. And then the next picture is a picture of Adolf Hitler as a World War I soldier. He's young. You'll notice he's got the handlebar mustache instead of his little creepy one. It is said, I don't know if this is true, but it is said that those handlebar mustaches were fairly common then. It is said that Adolf Hitler came in contact with that mustard gas because he in a gas attack, he went to put his mask on and he couldn't get it to seal properly. His mustache got stuck in it. And that was part of the reason he was exposed to the mustard gas. And he decided to cut that part of his mustache off as a result so that it would seal better. And then he continued to wear that ugly, awful little mustache. So I think that you'll recognize him. It looks like Adolf Hitler, a very young Adolf Hitler with a creepy mustache. All right. Okay, so where is America standing in all this as the hundreds of thousands of soldiers are dying mostly on the fields of France? There is an incredible submarine warfare going on in the Mediterranean, in the North Atlantic, and the Atlantic. And essentially, Germany is landlocked and Great Britain is not. And so German subs are constantly harassing the shipping lanes between North America and England, North America and Spain, North America and probably even North Africa, trying to prevent goods to getting to England. Initially, in the beginning of the war, America was selling and trading with both. But it got to the point where Germany decided they weren't going to tolerate it anymore, that we were basically sitting on the fence and not choosing sides. And so America tried to stay neutral during the war, but really unrestricted submarine warfare and the fact that our trade was crippled, our economy was being affected, and Americans were dying on ships. Some of them just passenger ships that may or may not have been used to secretly ship weapons and other things to the British. So, but initially America's policy was neutrality. There's a lot of reasons that we stayed neutral. We are an isolationist country in general. But this war was 3,000 miles away or so, didn't involve us. Our president, Woodrow Wilson, was a bit of a pacifist. He didn't have any interest in getting involved in the war. In fact, after his 4 years in office the first time, when he ran for re-election, he ran on the campaign that he kept us out of the war, ironically. So we don't get involved in the war until his second term. And then I also mentioned just trade in general. U.S. continued to trade with Germany and Britain, but sided generally with the Allies, and we did provide war supplies to the British. Eventually, let's see here, I've got something out of... So America's going to begin to move towards war, probably more so than any other reason that the Germans decided to re-engage in unrestricted submarine warfare. But generally... I'm going to just list a few things that kind of led us that direction. So the unrestricted submarine warfare. In May of 1915, I think it was a British cruise liner called the Lusitania, you've heard of it, was sunk in the Atlantic. and there were dozens and dozens and dozens of Americans on board. I think it was probably the first time that a passenger ship went down with a significant number of Americans on it. And then in 1916, an ambassador, a German, okay, I'm forgetting my history. The Zimmermann telegram. I can't remember if Zimmermann is the German. Yeah. So the German ambassador or diplomat sent a telegram to Mexico, encouraging them to get involved in the war by attacking America's underbelly, and aligning itself up with Germany in exchange for, once the war was over, Germany would return some of that territory in the Northwest, California, New Mexico, parts of Texas, that they would return it back to Mexico. And as the story goes, the Zimmermann telegram actually went through a telegraph office in the United Kingdom, where it was intercepted, and then it was sent to President Wilson, who was horrified, angry, and my memory is that it was also secretly leaked to the press, and so Americans were just beside themselves in anger that Germany would try to solicit help from our neighbors to the southwest. So I would say that was the final straw, coupled with the submarine attacks. In 1917, unfortunately, the Tsar of Russia, Tsar Nicholas II, Romanov, and his family were arrested by the Bolsheviks, and they were taken captive and held for about a year. They removed themselves from the war, which freed up all those German soldiers on the Eastern Front to move to the Western Front, where the French and the British were just completely worn out. And that was extremely frightening situation for the British and the French. However, fortunately, the Americans had decided at that point that they were going to enter the war, and President Wilson had formally went to Congress and asked for a declaration of war. There is a picture of that historic moment with the president sitting or standing in joint houses of Congress. That is the same one that serves today. That may even be the same clock. I've seen that picture, that image, when the president does the State of the Union address. And so America enters the war. The formal declaration of war was April 2nd, 1917. So the war's already been going on for 2.5 years, about 3 years by the time we get involved in the war. So America begins to prepare for war. We were completely unprepared for war. We were resisting the idea of going to war. So we had to raise an army, we had to build ships, we had to get our act together. But we were healthy, and we weren't worn out from the trenches. How did America prepare for war? Just really quick. There's a whole industrial engine that has to get up and going. I don't know if you pay attention to any of President Trump's press meetings, but he talks about this fight against coronavirus as a war, a battle. He even has instituted some sort of War Power Act, which allows him to force companies to shift industry from one thing to another thing, to something war related. So, for instance, he has told General Motors or Ford, I think it's Ford, some of their factories in Michigan, that they have to stop. Well, they actually aren't producing anything right now, but to use their factories to make ventilators. Because we are at war with this virus, and you hear him using that language. He is industrial. He's mechanizing America's factories for war against this virus and producing medical supplies and that sort of thing. And so the entire economy in America in 1917 moves towards war production. The War Industries Board is created, which basically organizes. Oh, here we go. Organizes mass production of goods. Industrial production increases 20%. They organize a Food Administration Board that's going to help people conserve food because we're going to have to be feeding troops. Herbert Hoover, future president, takes that over, encourages Americans to grow their own gardens, their own food. I've seen people doing that during this crisis. You go to Walmart or over at Home Depot and they're encouraging people to make their own gardens. Food delivery to the Allied troops triples during this time period. So farmers are making money, they're producing food. Let's see what else. Overall cost of the war, I don't know what this equates to today, but Congress set aside $35.5 billion for the war effort. Let me say that again, $35.5 billion. I don't know how that translates into modern dollars, but the stimulus package for fighting coronavirus today is going to end up about $4 trillion. So, income tax is introduced during this time frame, and so the government begins to collect income taxes. They put excise taxes on things. They raise money through Liberty loans and government bonds. They call them Liberty loans, Victory loans. They have a whole arm of the federal government that is essentially, they call it Committee on Public Information, but it's a propaganda arm. They're the ones that make all those beautiful posters that we saw when we were at the World War I Museum. I have several pictures of some of those propaganda posters. Our boys need socks. Knit your bit, American Red Cross, or save a loaf a week, help win the war. Be patriotic, sign your country's pledge to save food, things like that. There's a few other things here. There was a lot of anti-immigrant sentiment that happened in the country. Anything German was renamed. Like the hamburger, which is actually named after a city in Germany, was renamed a Liberty Sandwich. Congress passed something called the Espionage and Sedition Acts, which was similar to the law that John Adams passed when he was president, but again, a violation of the First Amendment. African Americans were still refused rights to join certain branches of the military. The Army was still segregated, but there were a number of Black Americans that served bravely during the war, extremely bravely. Women served in industry. They served in factories and plants. Lots and lots of women entered the workforce. This was kind of a huge influx. Of course, nursing and that sort of thing. Towards the tail end of the war, jump ahead just a little bit, I mentioned this earlier, the Spanish flu, boom, came in two waves. It hit one season and it came back a few months later, worse than it was the first time. And it was devastating. There's pictures in here that I thought you would actually get a kick out of, because we kind of think it's funny that we're walking around with face masks on. There's actually a picture, I don't know if it's Babe Ruth, but it's a professional baseball game, and the players and the umpires and the catcher are all wearing face masks. There's some pictures of some large hospitalized facilities that were built to accommodate the numbers of people that were sick. I think I'm going to end it there. I'm running out of steam. So I would like for you guys to read chapter 19. I think it's section 3. I need to go back and double check. It'll be in your PowerPoint, which talks specifically about America's boots on the ground. How did we help the Allies defeat the Germans and the Austria-Hungary Empire and the Ottoman Empire? How did that happen? What were the battles like? What did it look like? And I would like for you to read that as you are reading it for a reading quiz. Let's see, tomorrow's Wednesday, so the reading quiz will be next Monday. So it will be specifically on that chapter in that section. It won't be like the one that you took today, that it was more a totality of what I had talked about. It will actually be a reading quiz like you're used to taking. And so I'm going to put a pause on World War I for now. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I hope you enjoyed the video clips that you're going to watch. There was one other video clip that I did not mention, but you'll see it in the PowerPoint. And I think that's it. I'm going to go upload this video, and I'm going to try to go sleep and be awake for any questions that you have tomorrow. So love you guys, miss you, and I hope you enjoy the lesson today. Captain America says, signing out. Bye.